A millionaire was walking through the city and saw two twins begging at the traffic light. But when he opened the car door, he was shocked to discover what they were capable of. Subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories like this one. The scorching summer sun beat down mercilessly on the streets of Phoenix, Arizona, as Jake and Josh Thompson positioned themselves strategically at their usual intersection. At 14, the twin brothers had mastered the art of survival, their matching blue eyes scanning the rows of cars that stretched before them. Their worn spray bottles and squeegees hung ready at their sides, tools of their daily trade. "Red light coming up," Jake whispered to his brother, his voice carrying the weight of someone far beyond his years. Despite their identical appearance, both sporting sun-bleached brown hair and weathered t-shirts, Jake had always been the more serious of the two, carrying the invisible burden of unofficial leadership. Josh nodded, already moving toward a sleek black Mercedes that had just pulled up. His approach was practiced, perfected through countless repetitions, a friendly smile, a respectful distance, and the universal gesture asking permission to clean the windshield. The driver, a middle-aged woman wearing designer sunglasses, quickly waved him away without making eye contact. "Their loss," Jake said supportively, watching his brother return to their corner. "We've still got half a day ahead of us." The twins had developed their routine over the past 8 months, ever since their foster home situation had become untenable. They never discussed the details of their departure, but they'd made a pact. Staying together on the streets was better than being separated in the system. They had each other, and that was enough. Their spot at the intersection of Central Avenue and Thomas Road had become their unofficial territory. Other kids knew to respect their claim, not out of fear, but because the twins had earned their place through reliability and hard work. They never hassled anyone, always said please and thank you, and did their best to keep their clothes clean despite their circumstances. "Look alive, brother," Josh called out suddenly. Black Lexus, third in line. The car Josh pointed out caught Jake's attention, not just because of its pristine condition, but because of the man behind the wheel. Unlike the usual hurried commuters, this driver sat with a peculiar stillness, watching them through the windshield with unexpected intensity. Michael Richardson had taken an unusual route to work that morning, a decision that would alter not just his day, but the course of multiple lives. As CEO of Richardson Enterprises, one of Arizona's fastest-growing technology companies, he rarely ventured into this part of town. But a construction detour had led him here, and now he couldn't take his eyes off the two boys working the intersection. The twins approached his car together, an unconscious synchronization in their movements that spoke of years of working as one unit. Michael rolled down his window before they could even ask, the blast of air conditioning briefly mixing with the oppressive heat outside. "Good morning, sir," Jake said, his voice clear and professional. "Would you like your windshield cleaned today?" Michael studied their faces, noting the careful way they held themselves, the intelligent gleam in their eyes, and the subtle signs of hardship they tried so hard to conceal. In them, he saw shadows of his own past, memories of another young boy who had once done whatever it took to survive. "Yes," he replied, his voice carrying a warmth that made both boys pause. "Please, go ahead." As they worked in tandem, one spraying while the other wiped with practiced efficiency, Michael noticed details that others might miss. The careful way they preserved their limited water supply, the methodical attention to spots others might overlook, the quiet communication between them that required no words. When they finished, Michael handed them each a $20 bill. The boys' eyes widened, but they maintained their composure, thanking him with genuine gratitude. "You two do good work," Michael said, looking at them directly. "How long have you been at this intersection?" The brothers exchanged a quick glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Jake, ever the protective one, answered carefully, "We've been here a while, sir. We take pride in doing a good job." Michael nodded, recognizing the measured response of someone who had learned to be cautious with information. The light turned green, but he lingered for a moment longer, his mind already racing with possibilities. "I might have some other work for you boys if you're interested. I'll be back tomorrow, same time." As he drove away, Michael watched in his rearview mirror as the twins returned to their corner, their heads bent together in discussion. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as memories of his own past surged forward. Memories of hunger, of determination, of the one person who had finally given him a chance. Jake and Josh watched the Lexus disappear into the morning traffic, their expressions thoughtful. "What do you think?" Josh asked, adjusting his spray bottle's nozzle. "I don't know," Jake replied, his natural caution warring with a spark of hope he couldn't quite suppress. But something felt different about him. "Did you notice how he actually looked at us? Not through us?" Josh nodded, understanding exactly what his brother meant. In their months on the street, they had become accustomed to being invisible, to people's eyes sliding past them as if they were part of the urban landscape. But this man had seen them, really seen them. As the day wore on and the sun climbed higher in the Arizona sky, the twins continued their work, but their thoughts kept returning to the man in the Lexus and his promise to return. They had learned the hard way not to trust easily, but something about this encounter felt like the beginning of something significant, like the first ray of dawn breaking through a long, dark night. Michael Richardson sat in his expansive office at the top floor of the Richardson Enterprises building, but his mind wasn't on the quarterly reports sprawled across his desk. Instead, he kept seeing the faces of those two boys, faces that seemed to emerge from his own past, stirring memories he had long kept carefully packed away. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Phoenix skyline stretched before him, a testament to the distance he had traveled from his own humble beginnings. 30 years ago, he had been just like those twins, doing whatever it took to survive on these same unforgiving streets. The parallel wasn't lost on him, and it stirred something deep in his soul. "Mr. Richardson?" His assistant's voice through the intercom interrupted his thoughts. "Mrs. Richardson is on line 1. Michael picked up the phone, his wife's familiar voice filling his ear. "Michael, darling, don't forget about the charity gala tonight. The Prescotts are expecting us to be at their table." "Victoria," he said, his tone thoughtful, "do you remember how we met?" There was a pause on the line. "Of course, dear. You were just starting your first company, and I was fresh out of business school. Why?" "Because sometimes life has a way of bringing things full circle," he replied, his mind already forming a plan. "I need to tell you something when I get home tonight. Something important." Meanwhile, across town, Jake and Josh were counting their day's earnings in their hidden spot behind an abandoned warehouse. They had converted a small storage room into their makeshift home, carefully concealing the entrance with discarded pallets and cardboard boxes. Inside, they had created a semblance of order. 2 rolled-up sleeping bags, a battery-operated lamp, and a few precious possessions carefully stored in weathered backpacks. $87, Jake announced, arranging the bills carefully. "One of our better days." Josh nodded, still thinking about their encounter with the man in the Lexus. "Do you think he'll really come back tomorrow?" "Maybe," Jake replied, his natural caution warring with hope. "But we can't count on it. We need to save every penny we can for winter." The twins had learned early on that survival required planning. They had a system. 70% of their earnings went into their emergency fund, 20% for food and immediate needs, and 10% for their future fund, a dream of eventually getting back to school and finding a real home. As evening approached, they made their way to their favorite diner, where Maria, the kind-hearted owner, often slipped them extra portions. The small restaurant had become something of a sanctuary, one of the few places where they could sit like normal teenagers and pretend, just for a while, that they had somewhere to belong. "My special boys," Maria greeted them warmly, already reaching for menus they didn't need. They always ordered the same thing. "You're later than usual today." "Good day at work," Josh replied with a grin, sliding into their regular booth. The vinyl seats were cracked and worn, but to the twins, they were more comfortable than any luxury furniture. As they ate their hamburgers, they couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation from nearby customers discussing the upcoming charity gala at the Prescott mansion. The event was apparently the social highlight of the season, bringing together Phoenix's wealthiest families for an evening of philanthropy and networking. "Imagine living like that," Josh mused, dunking a fry in ketchup. "Having so much money you can just give it away at fancy parties." Jake studied his brother's face, recognizing the dreamy look in his eyes. "Hey, remember what we promised each other? We're going to make it, but we'll do it our way. Honest work, one day at a time." Back at Richardson Enterprises, Michael was making some unusual phone calls. His first was to James Cooper, his old mentor, the man who had given him his first real chance at a better life. "James," he said when the call connected, "I need your advice. Remember what you did for me all those years ago? I think it's time for me to pay it forward." The conversation that followed was long and detailed, with James offering both encouragement and practical suggestions. By the time Michael left his office that evening, he had a clear plan forming in his mind. Victoria was waiting for him in their sprawling Paradise Valley home, elegantly dressed for the gala. "Michael, we're going to be late." What was so important that it couldn't wait until tomorrow? Michael took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to propose would challenge his wife's carefully constructed worldview. "Victoria, today I met two boys who reminded me of myself at their age. They're surviving on their own, working hard, staying together against all odds. I want to help them, really help them, not just with money, but with a home." Victoria's perfectly manicured hand froze in the act of adjusting her pearl necklace. "What exactly are you suggesting, Michael?" "I'm suggesting we open our home to them. Give them the chance I was given. These boys have potential, Victoria. I can see it in their eyes, in the way they carry themselves, in their work ethic. They just need someone to believe in them." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Victoria's expression shifted from surprise to concern to something approaching alarm. "You can't be serious. We don't know anything about these boys. What about our reputation? What would people say? Since when did we start letting other people's opinions dictate our actions?" Michael challenged gently. "Remember when you fell in love with me? I wasn't born into this world of galas and charity events. Someone took a chance on me, and that's why we're standing here today." Victoria turned away, her silk dress rustling softly. "We need to leave for the gala. We can discuss this later." But Michael knew the conversation wasn't over. As they drove to the Prescott mansion, he couldn't help but think about Jake and Josh, probably settling down for another night on the streets. Tomorrow, he promised himself, things would begin to change for those boys. He just had to figure out how to help his wife see past her prejudices to recognize the opportunity to make a real difference in two young lives. The following morning arrived with the same scorching intensity typical of Phoenix summers, but something felt different to Jake and Josh. They arrived at their intersection earlier than usual, their eyes scanning each passing vehicle for the familiar black Lexus. "Maybe we're being foolish," Jake muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Getting our hopes up over nothing." Josh was about to respond when the Lexus appeared, right on schedule. Michael Richardson pulled up to their corner, this time parking legally in a nearby spot and stepping out of his car. In the morning light, the twins could better see the man who had occupied their thoughts since yesterday. Tall, well-dressed in a casual button-down shirt and slacks, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Good morning, boys," Michael called out, approaching them with purposeful steps. "I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes. Have you had breakfast?" The twins exchanged glances, their well-honed street instincts warring with an inexplicable sense of trust. Something about Michael's direct gaze and open expression made it hard to maintain their usual skepticism. "There's a diner around the corner," Josh offered, thinking of Maria's place. "Perfect," Michael smiled. "Lead the way." Minutes later, they sat in the twins' regular booth, Maria's eyebrows rising in surprise at seeing her young friends accompanied by such a well-dressed patron. She hurried over with menus and coffee, her protective instincts evident in the way she hovered nearby. "Order whatever you'd like," Michael encouraged, noting how the boys automatically looked for the cheapest items. "I mean it. I remember what it's like to be growing boys." Over plates piled with pancakes, eggs, and bacon, Michael began to share his story. He told them about his own childhood on the streets of Chicago, about the odd jobs and desperate times, and about the man who had finally given him a chance. James Cooper, who had become his mentor and eventually helped him start his first business. "Sometimes," Michael said, watching their reactions carefully, "life gives us opportunities to come full circle, to pass on the kindness we've received." Jake set down his fork, his expression serious. "What exactly are you suggesting, sir?" "I'm suggesting that you boys deserve better than this. You're smart, hard-working, and clearly responsible. I see potential in you, the same potential someone once saw in me. I want to help, if you'll let me." "Help how?" Josh asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "To start with, I have a proposition. I own a technology company, and we have a student apprenticeship program. Usually it's for high school students, but I'm willing to make an exception. You'd learn basic computer skills, earn a proper wage, and most importantly, have a chance to build a future." The twins listened intently as Michael outlined his proposal. They would work at his company part-time, attend a specialized program to catch up on their education, and, this part he delivered carefully, he wanted to offer them a place to stay. "My wife and I have a large house," he explained, noting how they tensed at the mention of accommodation. "There's a separate guest house that would be perfect for you two. You'd have your privacy, but also stability and support." Jake, ever the protective one, straightened in his seat. "Why would you do this for us? What's the catch?" Michael's response was immediate and sincere. "Because 30 years ago, I was you, and someone took a chance on me that changed my life forever. The only catch is that you'd have to commit to the program, work hard, study hard, and stay out of trouble, which, from what I've observed, you already do." At that moment, Maria appeared with refills of orange juice, her presence giving the twins a moment to process everything they'd heard. When she left, Josh broke the silence. Could we think about it?" "Of course," Michael replied, pulling out a business card and writing a personal cell phone number on the back. "Take all the time you need. But know that this offer is real, and it's not going away." As they finished their breakfast, Michael shared more details about his company and the apprenticeship program. He spoke about the other young people involved, the skills they could learn, and the possibilities that could open up for them. The conversation was interrupted by Michael's phone buzzing, Victoria's name flashing on the screen. He silenced it with a slight frown, remembering their tense discussion from the previous night. "There's something else you should know," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "My wife, she's still adjusting to this idea. She comes from a different world, and change isn't easy for her. But I want you to understand that this isn't about charity or a rich man's whim. This is about recognizing potential and providing opportunity." Jake nodded slowly, understanding the unsaid implications. "We know about people looking down on us, sir. We've dealt with it before. And that's exactly why I believe in you both," Michael responded. "You've maintained your dignity and work ethic despite everything. That says more about your character than any fancy education or social status ever could." As they prepared to leave the diner, Michael handed them each an envelope. "This is an advance on your first week's pay, assuming you accept. Use it to get whatever you need. The card has my personal number. Call or text any time." Standing on the sidewalk outside, the morning sun now high in the sky, the twins watched as Michael's Lexus disappeared into traffic. The envelopes in their hands felt heavy with possibility, and the business card seemed to burn with promise in Jake's pocket. "What do you think?" Josh asked, his voice thick with emotion. Jake stared down the street, his mind racing with possibilities and concerns. I think we need to be smart about this. But Josh?" He turned to his brother, a rare smile breaking through his usual serious expression. "I think this might be our chance." They returned to their corner, but the familiar routine of washing windshields now felt different. Each car that stopped, each dollar earned, seemed like part of an old life that might soon be behind them. The weight of Michael's business card in Jake's pocket reminded them that maybe, just maybe, their luck was finally changing. But even as hope bloomed in their hearts, they couldn't quite shake the mention of Victoria's reluctance. They had learned long ago that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Yet something about Michael's sincerity, about the way he shared his own story, made them want to believe that this time might be different. Victoria Richardson stood in her immaculate kitchen, staring out at the perfectly manicured garden through floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning light caught the diamonds on her fingers as she clutched her coffee cup, her thoughts churning with the conversation she'd overheard between Michael and James Cooper last night after the gala. "They're street children, Michael," she'd said when confronting him. "We can't just bring them into our home. What about our social standing? What about safety? Now, watching the gardeners meticulously trim the hedges, she couldn't shake the memory of Michael's disappointed expression. In their 15 years of marriage, she'd never seen him so passionate about anything outside of business. Her phone buzzed with a message from Catherine Prescott. "Darling, lunch at the club today. Everyone's talking about your early departure from the gala." Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers hovered over the phone. The Phoenix Country Club had been her sanctuary for years, a place where she felt secure in her social position. But today, the thought of facing the inevitable questions made her stomach churn. The sound of the front door opening interrupted her thoughts. Michael appeared in the kitchen, looking energized despite the early hour. "I just met with them," he announced without preamble. "Victoria, if you could just see these boys—" "I don't want to see them," she cut him off, then immediately regretted her sharp tone. Softening slightly, she added, "Michael, please try to understand. We have a certain position to maintain. The board members, our friends—" "Our friends." Michael's voice carried an edge she rarely heard. "The same friends who whispered about me when we first started dating? When I was just a nouveau riche tech entrepreneur who didn't know the right fork to use at dinner?" Victoria flinched. She remembered those early days, the subtle sneers, the backhanded compliments about how she was helping Michael adjust to society. She'd defended him then, seeing past his rough edges to the brilliant, kind man beneath. When had she become the very thing she'd once fought against? "They're 14, Victoria. The same age I was when James Cooper took a chance on me. They're smart, hard-working kids who just need an opportunity. And what about our reputation? What about the charity foundation? Do you know how hard I've worked to establish us in this community?" Michael stepped closer, his expression softening. "The foundation helps hundreds of children every year. But it's all at arm's length, isn't it? Writing checks, attending galas, making speeches. When did we stop doing real good in favor of looking good?" His words hit home harder than he probably intended. Victoria turned back to the window, watching a hummingbird flit between the bougainvillea blooms. She thought about the charity foundation she'd helped build, the countless fundraisers she'd organized. Had it all become more about maintaining appearances than actually helping people? "They won't be living in the main house," Michael continued gently. "The guest house is perfect. Private entrance, separate space. We can start with the apprenticeship program, see how it goes. And what will I tell everyone? Catherine already texted about the gala, and you know how quickly news spreads in our circle. Tell them the truth," Michael suggested. "Tell them that Richardson Enterprises is expanding its youth apprenticeship program to help promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds. It's not even a lie. I'm already working on making it a formal initiative." Victoria set down her coffee cup, noting how her hand trembled slightly. "You're really serious about this, aren't you? More serious than I've been about anything in a long time." He paused, then added softly, "Do you remember what you said to me on our first date? When I apologized for not knowing about wine pairings?" A small smile tugged at her lips despite herself. "I said that anyone can learn about wine, but a good heart can't be taught." "Exactly." Michael placed his hands on her shoulders, turning her to face him. "These boys have good hearts, Victoria. They've survived on their own without turning bitter or cruel. They wake up every day and work hard instead of asking for handouts. They protect each other. They're everything I was at their age, but they're alone." Victoria studied her husband's face, seeing the passion and determination in his eyes. She thought about their own inability to have children, a private pain they'd learned to live with over the years. Was this Michael's way of filling that void? Or was it something more, a chance to make a real difference, to do more than just write checks and attend galas? "I need time," she finally said. "And I need to meet them first, on my terms." Michael's face lit up with hope. "Of course, whatever you need. And they'll need proper clothes," she continued, her mind already organizing and planning despite her reservations. "Education assessments, medical checkups, documentation. Does this mean you're considering it?" Victoria took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "It means I'm not saying no. Not yet. But Michael?" She fixed him with a serious look. "If we do this, we do it right. No halfway measures. These boys will reflect on us, on the family name. If they're going to be part of our world, they need to learn how to navigate it. Michael nodded, relief evident in his expression. He knew his wife well enough to recognize this as a significant concession. "Thank you," he said simply. As he left for the office, Victoria remained in the kitchen, her mind racing. She picked up her phone, looking at Catherine's unanswered text. After a moment's hesitation, she typed, "Need to rain check on lunch." Working on a new foundation initiative. Moving to her home office, she opened her laptop and began researching youth rehabilitation programs, educational requirements for homeschooling, and legal considerations for guardianship. If there was one thing Victoria Richardson knew how to do, it was to be thoroughly prepared for any challenge. Still, as she worked, she couldn't quite shake the nagging worry about what this would mean for their carefully constructed life. The social implications, the potential risks, the massive change it would bring to their comfortable routine. But beneath these concerns, a small voice reminded her of another time, years ago, when she'd chosen love over social expectations. Perhaps it was time to be brave again. 3 days had passed since Michael's offer, and Jake and Josh found themselves standing before the imposing gates of the Richardson estate. They had called Michael the previous evening, after countless hours of discussion and careful consideration, to accept his proposal. Now, clutching small backpacks containing everything they owned, they waited as the gates slowly opened. "Remember," Jake whispered to his brother, "we can leave any time. We stick together, no matter what." Josh nodded, his eyes wide as they took in the magnificent house before them. The main building was a modern architectural masterpiece of glass and stone, while off to the side stood a smaller but equally elegant structure they assumed was the guest house Michael had mentioned. Michael emerged from the front door, wearing casual weekend clothes that somehow made him seem more approachable than his business attire. "Welcome, boys," he called out warmly, walking down the curved driveway to meet them. "I'm glad you decided to come." As they followed him toward the house, movement caught their eye. Through one of the large windows, they glimpsed a tall, elegant woman watching them. Victoria Richardson's expression was carefully neutral, but her rigid posture spoke volumes. Michael led them to the guest house first, giving them time to settle before meeting his wife. The interior was more luxurious than anything the twins had ever seen. 2 separate bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, a small living area, and a kitchenette. "This will be your space," Michael explained, showing them around. "You'll have complete privacy here, but you're always welcome in the main house too. We thought you might want some time to adjust before meeting me." Victoria's voice came from the doorway, causing everyone to turn. She stood there in a casual but clearly expensive outfit, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the weekend morning hour. Michael's surprise was evident. They had agreed to give the boys time to settle in before introductions. But Victoria had apparently decided to take matters into her own hands. "Yes," she continued, stepping into the guest house, her eyes taking in every detail of the twins' appearance. "I thought it best we meet right away. I'm Victoria Richardson." Jake and Josh straightened instinctively, years of trying to appear presentable to social workers and authorities kicking in. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Richardson," Jake said formally. "We really appreciate your kindness." Something in Jake's polite response seemed to catch Victoria off guard. Perhaps she had expected street-hardened attitudes or crude behavior. Instead, she found herself facing 2 well-spoken boys who, despite their worn clothes, carried themselves with quiet dignity. "You'll need new clothes," she said abruptly, her event-planning instincts taking over. "And school supplies. We have appointments scheduled next week for educational assessments and medical checkups." She paused, then added more softly, "We'll need to go shopping first thing tomorrow." The twins exchanged glances, communicating silently as they often did. The mention of shopping and medical appointments made this all feel suddenly real and somewhat overwhelming. "Mrs. Richardson," Josh ventured, "we don't want to be any trouble. We can wear what we have for now." "Nonsense," Victoria cut in, her tone brooking no argument. "If you're going to be part of the Richardson Enterprises apprenticeship program, you need to look the part." She glanced around the guest house, her natural organizing instincts kicking in. "The linens are fresh, but we should get you your own sets. What colors do you prefer?" The boys stood speechless, overwhelmed by this sudden shift from reluctant hostess to efficient planner. Michael watched with barely concealed amusement as his wife's need for order and control transformed into unexpected acceptance. "Victoria," he said gently, "maybe we should let them settle in first." She blinked, as if suddenly realizing she had been making plans without consulting anyone. "Of course, yes. Well, I'll leave you to get comfortable. Dinner is at 6 in the main house. We'll discuss the schedule then." With that, she turned and left, her heels clicking on the stone pathway. Once she was gone, Michael chuckled softly. That's Victoria's way of saying welcome. When she starts planning, it means she's accepted something. Trust me, this is good news. Jake and Josh managed small smiles, still trying to process everything. The guest house alone was larger than any place they'd stayed in the past year, and the idea of new clothes and medical checkups felt surreal. "Take some time to settle in," Michael continued. "There's food in the kitchen, clean towels in the bathrooms, and new toothbrushes and supplies in the drawers. Make yourselves at home." He headed toward the door, then paused. "And boys, thank you for trusting us with this chance." Left alone, the twins explored their new space with a mixture of awe and caution. Josh opened every cabinet in the kitchenette, finding it fully stocked with snacks and drinks. Jake checked the security of the doors and windows, an old habit he couldn't quite shake. "This is crazy," Josh whispered, sinking into a plush armchair. "Are we dreaming?" Jake sat on the couch opposite him, running his hand over the soft fabric. "If we are, it's the same dream." He looked around the room, then at his brother. "But you heard what Mrs. Richardson said. They're going to expect a lot from us. We'll need to prove ourselves." "We can do it," Josh said with quiet determination. "We've handled worse. At least here we have a real chance." From the main house, Victoria watched through a window as the boys explored their new space. Something about their careful movements, the way they checked everything methodically, touched a chord in her heart she hadn't expected. They didn't run around excitedly like typical teenagers, given free rein in a new place. Instead, they moved with the cautious appreciation of those who had learned the hard way that good things don't always last. "They're different than I expected," she admitted to Michael, who had come to stand beside her. "They're survivors," he replied simply. "Just like I was." Victoria turned to study her husband's face, seeing in it the same determination she'd fallen in love with years ago. Perhaps, she thought, this wasn't just about helping two street boys. Perhaps it was about healing old wounds and creating something meaningful beyond their comfortable bubble of wealth and social status. The first week in the Richardson household passed in a whirlwind of activity. Victoria, true to her word, had transformed their integration into a full-scale project, complete with schedules, appointments, and carefully planned shopping expeditions. The twins found themselves swept along in her efficiently organized tsunami of change. "Stand still, please," the tailor instructed, adjusting the hem of Jake's new dress pants. They were at an upscale men's boutique, where Victoria had insisted on having proper clothes made for their upcoming start at Richardson Enterprises. Josh watched from nearby, already fitted in his new outfit, crisp khakis and a blue button-down shirt that made his eyes seem even brighter. The transformation was remarkable. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. "Mrs. Richardson," Jake started hesitantly, catching her eye in the mirror. "This is too much. The ready-made clothes would have been fine." Victoria looked up from her phone where she'd been coordinating their upcoming appointments. "Nonsense. Proper fitting is essential. First impressions matter in the business world, and you'll be representing both the family and the company." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but there was an underlying warmth that hadn't been there days ago. Something had shifted during their shopping expeditions and daily interactions. Perhaps it was the boys' quiet gratitude, or their obvious determination to learn everything they could about their new world. "Now," she continued, consulting her phone, "we have the educational assessment tomorrow morning, followed by dental appointments in the afternoon. Michael will take you to the company on Thursday to start your orientation." The twins exchanged glances. Their heads were spinning with all the changes, but they were determined to keep up. Each night, they would retreat to the guest house and compare notes on everything they'd learned: proper table manners, business etiquette, the countless unwritten rules of their new social sphere. Back at the house that evening, Victoria was organizing the boys' new wardrobes in their rooms when she discovered something that made her pause. Tucked carefully in Jake's old backpack was a worn photograph. Two small boys, with a woman who shared their blue eyes, all three smiling at the camera. "That's our mom." Jake's voice came quietly from the doorway. Victoria started, almost dropping the photo. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "It's okay," Jake assured her, stepping into the room. "It was taken about a year before she became ill. She worked 3 jobs to keep us together. Taught us everything about being honest and working hard." He paused, swallowing hard. "After she was gone, the foster system, they wanted to separate us. We couldn't let that happen." Victoria looked down at the photograph again, seeing it with new eyes. The woman's smile was tired but genuine, her arms protectively around her son's. Something shifted in Victoria's chest, a recognition of the love and sacrifice captured in that simple image. "She would be proud of you both," she said softly, carefully returning the photo to its place. "The way you've looked after each other, stayed together despite everything." Jake's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected empathy in her voice. "Thank you, Mrs. Richardson." That night at dinner, the atmosphere in the formal dining room was noticeably different. Victoria had been instructing the boys on proper place settings and dining etiquette, but tonight she seemed more relaxed, even sharing stories about her own social faux pas when she first entered high society. "You should have seen me at my first charity gala," she recalled, laughing softly. "I used the fish fork for my salad, and Catherine Prescott nearly had a conniption." "Speaking of the Prescotts," Michael interjected, "they'll be at the company's summer party next month, which reminds me, boys, that will be your first official social event. Think of it as a graduation ceremony of sorts after your initial training." Josh looked up from his perfectly cooked salmon. "Will there be many people there?" "Most of the company's senior staff and their families," Michael replied, "plus some business associates and friends. It's a casual affair. Well, casual by Victoria's standards," he added with a wink at his wife. Victoria picked up her water glass, a thoughtful expression on her face. "We should invite Maria from the diner," she said suddenly, surprising everyone at the table. "The boys mentioned how kind she's been to them, and it would be good to have a familiar face there." The twins stared at her in amazement. They had mentioned Maria only once, in passing, but Victoria had not only remembered but thought to include her. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about her growing understanding of their world. Later that evening, as Michael and Victoria prepared for bed, she caught him watching her with an amused expression. "What?" she asked, applying her nighttime moisturizer. "You're starting to care about them," he observed. "Really care. Not just about how they'll fit into our world." Victoria paused, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "They're good boys, Michael. Under all that survival instinct and street smarts, they're just children who've had to grow up too fast." She turned to face him. "But don't think this means I'm going soft. They still need structure, guidance, and proper preparation for the life ahead of them." Michael crossed the room to kiss her forehead. "Of course, dear. Heaven forbid anyone accuse Victoria Richardson of going soft." In the guest house, Jake and Josh were also preparing for bed, their new pajamas still stiff with newness. The drawers were filled with clothes, the bathroom stocked with products they'd never dreamed of owning, and their school supplies were neatly arranged on the desks in each room. "Do you think we can really do this?" Josh asked, running his hand over the smooth surface of his new laptop, a tool they'd need for their upcoming training. Jake looked out the window at the main house, where lights were still on in several rooms. "We have to," he replied. "Not just for us, but for them too. They're taking a huge chance on us, Josh. We can't let them down." As night settled over the Richardson estate, 4 people lay awake in their beds, each contemplating the strange turns life had taken. In the main house, Victoria found herself planning not just schedules and wardrobes, but ways to help the boys preserve their connection to their past while building a bridge to their future. In the guest house, the twins dreamed of opportunities while holding tight to the values their mother had instilled in them. Change was happening, slowly but surely, reshaping not just the boys' lives, but the hearts and minds of those around them. The Richardson Enterprises headquarters stood like a gleaming monument of glass and steel against the Phoenix skyline. Jake and Josh, dressed in their new business casual attire, followed Michael through the modern lobby, trying not to gape at their surroundings. "Good morning, Mr. Richardson," the security guard called out, then did a double-take at the identical faces behind him. "These must be our new apprentices?" "Indeed they are, George," Michael replied warmly. "Jake and Josh Thompson will be joining our youth program. Make sure they get their proper IDs today." The elevator ride to the 14th floor was silent, both boys taking deep breaths to calm their nerves. When the doors opened, they stepped into a bustling office space filled with the soft hum of productivity. "This is our technology development floor," Michael explained, leading them through the maze of desks and meeting rooms. "You'll start in the junior coding program with Ms. Chen. She's one of our best instructors." Sarah Chen's workspace was a creative chaos of monitors and tech equipment. The young woman looked up from her computer, her friendly smile immediately putting the twins at ease. "Welcome to the Tech Nest," she greeted them, standing to shake their hands. "Mr. Richardson has told me about your potential. Ready to learn how to speak to computers?" The next few hours flew by as Sarah introduced them to the basics of programming. Jake found himself completely absorbed in the logical patterns of coding, while Josh showed a natural talent for user interface design. "They're naturals," Sarah reported to Michael later that day, "especially considering they've had limited computer access before. Their problem-solving skills are remarkable." Meanwhile, in another part of Phoenix, Victoria was attending her regular lunch with her social circle at the country club. The usual gossip and small talk flowed around her, but her mind kept drifting to the educational assessments she'd reviewed that morning. Despite gaps in their formal education, the twins had tested remarkably well in mathematics and logical reasoning. "Victoria?" Catherine Prescott's voice cut through her thoughts. "You seem distracted, darling. Is everything all right with the new project Michael mentioned?" Victoria straightened in her chair, noting the barely concealed curiosity in her friend's tone. "The apprenticeship program is exceeding expectations," she replied smoothly. "In fact, we're considering expanding it to include more students from diverse backgrounds." Back at Richardson Enterprises, the twins were having lunch in the company cafeteria when they overheard a conversation from a nearby table. "Richardson's charity cases," one young executive whispered to another. "Probably just a PR stunt." Josh felt his shoulders tense, but Jake laid a hand on his arm. "Remember what Michael said. Prove them wrong through actions, not words." The afternoon brought their first real challenge. While practicing basic database management, Josh accidentally accessed a restricted file containing sensitive company information. Panic flashed across his face as he quickly closed the window. "Jake," he whispered urgently, "what do I do?" "Should we pretend it didn't happen?" Jake studied his brother's worried expression, thinking of all they had to lose. But then he remembered Michael's words about trust and integrity. "We tell them," he said firmly. "Right now." They found Sarah first, explaining what had happened. She immediately took them to Michael's office, where Josh nervously recounted the incident. "I'm so sorry, sir," he finished, standing straight despite his fear. "I know this could look bad, but we promise to be honest with you." Michael was silent for a moment, studying both boys. Then a smile spread across his face. "You just passed your first test of character," he said proudly. "Integrity isn't about never making mistakes. It's about how you handle them when they happen." That evening, as they rode home with Michael, both boys felt a weight lift from their shoulders. The day had been challenging, but they had faced each challenge head-on. They found Victoria in the kitchen, surprisingly casual in yoga pants and a loose sweater, preparing a snack. "How was your first day?" she asked, sliding a plate of fresh fruit and cookies across the counter. As the twins shared stories about their day, including the database incident, Victoria felt something warm bloom in her chest. These boys, who had every reason to be cynical and distrustful, were proving to be more honest and hard-working than many of the privileged children she knew. "You know," she said, almost to herself, "we're hosting the Prescotts for dinner next week. I think it's time to properly introduce you to our social circle." Both boys froze mid-bite. "Are you sure that's wise, Mrs. Richardson?" Jake asked carefully. We wouldn't want to embarrass you. Victoria's expression softened. The only embarrassment would be hiding you away as if we were ashamed. Which we're not. She straightened up, her event planning mode activating. We'll need to work on your dinner conversation skills. And perhaps a quick refresher on formal table settings. Michael, watching from the doorway, smiled at his wife's transformation. The woman who had initially resisted bringing street children into their home was now planning their society debut with the same determination she brought to her charity galas. Later that night, in the guest house, Jake and Josh lay in their comfortable beds, processing the events of the day. It's strange, Josh mused, but when I made that mistake today, I was more worried about disappointing them than losing all of this. Jake nodded in the darkness. I know what you mean. It's not just about the opportunity anymore. They're actually starting to feel like family, Josh finished softly. The word hung in the air between them, both scary and comforting in its implications. They had survived so long on their own, depending only on each other. Opening their hearts to others felt like a risk, but perhaps it was a risk worth taking. From her bedroom window, Victoria watched the lights go out in the guest house. She thought about the upcoming dinner with the Prescotts, about the potential judgments and whispers. For the first time, she realized she cared more about protecting the boys than about protecting her social status. They're changing us as much as we're changing them, she murmured to Michael, who was reading beside her. That's exactly what family is supposed to do, he replied, squeezing her hand gently. The dining room of the Richardson mansion gleamed under soft chandelier light as Victoria made final adjustments to the place settings. The Prescotts would arrive in less than an hour, and everything had to be perfect, not just for her reputation, but for the boys. Remember, she instructed Jake and Josh, who stood nervously in their new blazers. Catherine Prescott is the unofficial queen of Phoenix society. Her approval can make life much easier for all of us. No pressure, Josh muttered under his breath, earning a small smile from Michael, who was adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. The past week had been filled with intensive coaching sessions. Victoria had drilled them on everything from wine glass placement to appropriate dinner conversation topics. The twins had absorbed it all with their characteristic determination, but tonight would be their first real test. The doorbell chimed precisely at 7. Catherine and William Prescott swept into the foyer, the very picture of old money elegance. Behind them came their daughter, Madison, a pretty 17-year-old who attended the most prestigious private school in Phoenix. Victoria, darling. Catherine air-kissed both cheeks, then paused as she spotted the twins. And these must be the young men we've heard so much about. Jake and Josh stepped forward, executing the perfect greeting they'd practiced with Victoria. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Prescott, they said in unison, then turned to William. Mr. Prescott. Catherine's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly, clearly not expecting such polished manners from former street children. Madison, however, was staring at the twins with undisguised curiosity. Shall we move to the dining room? Victoria suggested smoothly. Carter has prepared something special tonight. As they settled around the elegant table, Jake and Josh remembered every lesson Victoria had taught them. They waited for the ladies to be seated, placed their napkins correctly, and engaged in light conversation about the unseasonably mild weather. So, Catherine began, delicately cutting into her appetizer. Michael tells us you've joined the company's apprenticeship program. How are you finding it? It's been incredibly educational, Mrs. Prescott, Jake replied. Ms. Chen, our instructor, has introduced us to coding concepts that we find fascinating. Josh added, We're particularly interested in developing applications that could help other disadvantaged youth access educational resources. This caught William Prescott's attention. The investment banker set down his fork, studying the boys with new interest. That's quite ambitious. Have you considered the market potential for such applications? As Josh engaged William in a discussion about social enterprise possibilities, Victoria felt a surge of pride. The boys weren't just surviving this dinner, they were excelling. Madison, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. Is it true you used to wash car windows at intersections? The table fell silent. Catherine shot her daughter a mortified look, but before she could scold her, Jake responded with remarkable composure. Yes, we did, he said simply. We learned a lot about human nature at that intersection. Some people wouldn't look at us at all, while others, like Mr. Richardson, saw potential where others saw problems. Michael smiled warmly at Jake's response, while Victoria felt tears threatening to form. She blinked them away quickly, reaching for her water glass to cover the moment of emotion. "Well," Catherine said after a pause, "it's certainly admirable how you've adapted to all this." She gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "They've done more than adapt," Victoria found herself saying firmly. "They've excelled. Their test scores are remarkable. Their work ethic is exemplary, and they've shown more gratitude and integrity than many people I know who were born into privilege." The passion in her voice surprised everyone, especially the twins. This was a side of Victoria they hadn't seen before, the protective lioness rather than the society maven. The conversation moved on to safer topics, but something had shifted in the room. Catherine began watching the boys more thoughtfully, noting their perfect manners and intelligent responses. William engaged them in more detailed discussions about technology and business. Even Madison's initial curiosity evolved into genuine interest as she discovered the twins' quick wit and humor. After dessert, as they moved to the living room for coffee, Catherine pulled Victoria aside. "They're quite remarkable, dear," she admitted quietly. "Nothing at all like what I expected. You and Michael have done something truly special here." Victoria felt a weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying lift from her shoulders. "They did most of the work themselves," she replied. "We just opened the door." Later that night, after the Prescotts had left, the family gathered in the kitchen for their new tradition of late-night snacks and conversation. "You were amazing," Michael told the twins, passing around cookies that Carter had left for them. "William texted me already about introducing you to some tech investors he knows." "We couldn't have done it without Mrs. Richardson's training," Josh said, looking at Victoria with genuine appreciation. Victoria, who had kicked off her heels and was sitting casually on a kitchen stool, waved off the compliment. "You already had everything you needed inside you. I just helped with the finishing touches." "Still," Jake added, "thank you for defending us to Mrs. Prescott. That meant a lot." Victoria studied both boys, remembering her initial resistance to their presence in her home. How foolish those fears seemed now, faced with these remarkable young men who had overcome so much. "Well," she said, trying to maintain her composure, "we're family now." "That's what family does." The words slipped out naturally, but their impact was profound. The twins froze, cookies halfway to their mouths, while Michael beamed at his wife. For a moment, no one spoke, letting the weight of that simple declaration settle around them. Family. The word they'd all been dancing around for weeks now hung in the air, acknowledged at last. It wasn't just about charity anymore, or social experiments, or even second chances. Somewhere along the way, these four people had become something more, something real and precious, and surprisingly strong. Victoria's pearl necklace had gone missing. She discovered its absence while preparing for the Richardson Enterprises summer party, an event that had taken on special significance this year, as it would mark the twins' official introduction to the entire company. "I always keep it in this box," she said, standing in her walk-in closet while Michael adjusted his tie. "It was my grandmother's, Michael. I wore it at our wedding." The implications hung heavy in the air. The necklace had disappeared shortly after the twins had gained access to the main house. Victoria tried to push away the unwelcome thoughts, but years of social conditioning weren't easily overcome. "I'm sure it's just misplaced," Michael assured her, but she could see the concern in his eyes. The necklace was worth a small fortune, but its sentimental value was priceless. Meanwhile, in the guest house, Jake and Josh were putting the finishing touches on their presentation. Michael had given them the opportunity to showcase their educational app concept at the party, and they had worked tirelessly to perfect it. "Ready for the big day?" Jake asked, adjusting his brother's collar. "Almost," Josh replied, then hesitated. "Did you notice something off about Mrs. Richardson at breakfast? She seemed distant," Jake had noticed. After weeks of growing warmth and inclusion, Victoria's sudden coolness was jarring. "Maybe she's just stressed about the party," he suggested, but uncertainty gnawed at him. The summer party was being held in the Richardsons' expansive backyard. Tents had been erected, Catering staff bustled about, and the swimming pool sparkled invitingly in the late afternoon sun. Guests began arriving, including Maria from the diner, who looked both nervous and proud in her new dress. Victoria moved through the crowd with practiced grace, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The missing necklace weighed heavily on her mind. She hadn't mentioned it to the boys, couldn't bring herself to voice the suspicion that felt like a betrayal of the trust they'd built. "Mrs. Richardson?" Jake approached her carefully. "Is everything all right? You seem upset." Victoria looked at the boy before her, so responsible, so earnest. Shame flooded her as she realized how quickly she'd let old prejudices resurface. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just party stress." The evening progressed smoothly. The twins' presentation was a resounding success, with several investors expressing serious interest in their app. William Prescott himself offered to mentor them through the development process. "You must be so proud," Catherine Prescott remarked to Victoria. "They've come so far." Victoria nodded absently, her hand unconsciously touching her bare neck where the pearl necklace should have been. The gesture wasn't lost on Jake, who had been watching her closely all evening. After the presentation, he pulled Josh aside. "Something's wrong with Mrs. Richardson. It's more than party stress." Josh frowned. "Should we ask her directly?" "Let me try to figure it out first," Jake replied. Years of reading people's moods for survival had made him particularly attuned to subtle changes in behavior. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Jake noticed Victoria slip away to her bedroom. Making a decision, he followed at a discreet distance. Through the partially open door, he could see her standing at her jewelry box, shoulders slumped. "Mrs. Richardson?" He knocked gently. Victoria startled, quickly wiping her eyes. "Jake? What are you doing here?" "Something's been bothering you all day," he said directly. "Please tell me what's wrong. If we've done something..." Victoria looked at the earnest young face before her and felt her heart break a little. How could she have doubted them, even for a moment? "It's nothing you've done," she began, but then stopped as Jake's eyes fixed on something behind her. "Is that your jewelry box?" he asked, moving closer. "May I?" Puzzled, Victoria nodded. Jake approached the antique piece carefully, studying its ornate design. Then, with gentle fingers, he pressed a hidden catch she hadn't known existed. A secret compartment sprang open, revealing her grandmother's pearl necklace. "How did you?" Victoria gasped. At the intersection there was an antiques dealer who would let us shelter in his shop on really hot days, Jake explained. "He taught us about old furniture, secret compartments. When you showed us around the house that first day, I recognized the design of this box. The necklace must have slipped into the compartment when you were getting ready for the Prescott dinner." Victoria reached for the necklace with trembling hands, tears flowing freely now. "Oh, Jake, can you ever forgive me? I'm so ashamed." "You thought we had taken it," Jake finished quietly, no accusation in his voice. "It's okay, Mrs. Richardson. We understand. Trust takes time to build." Victoria pulled him into a fierce hug, something she had never done before. "No, it's not okay. You and Josh have proven yourselves 1,000 times over. I should never have doubted you." From the doorway, Michael and Josh watched the scene unfold. Josh had figured out what was happening. He and his brother had always been able to read each other's thoughts, and had brought Michael to witness the resolution. "Well," Michael said softly, "I think this calls for a family meeting." They gathered in the kitchen, their usual place for important conversations. Victoria, still clutching the recovered necklace, looked at each of them with tear-stained eyes. "I need to say something," she began. "When I thought the necklace was stolen, I let old prejudices cloud my judgment. I'm deeply ashamed of that. You boys have become..." She paused, gathering herself. "You've become sons to me. I love you both, and I hope you can forgive my moment of weakness." It was the first time she had used the word love, and its impact was profound. Josh was the first to move, wrapping her in a hug that Jake quickly joined. Michael watched, his own eyes moist, as his family, his real, complete family, embraced. "We love you too," Josh whispered, and Jake nodded against Victoria's shoulder. The pearl necklace caught the light as Victoria held her boys, its recovered presence a reminder that sometimes the most precious things are those that seem lost but find their way home. The success of the summer party and the resolution of the necklace incident marked a turning point for the Richardson family. As autumn approached, their lives had fallen into a comfortable rhythm that felt both natural and extraordinary. The twins' educational app was moving from concept to reality, with William Prescott's guidance proving invaluable. They spent their mornings at Richardson Enterprises, alternating between coding sessions with Sarah Chen and business development meetings. Afternoons were dedicated to their accelerated education program, where they were quickly making up for lost time. "Have you given any thought to college?" Michael asked one evening, as they all sat around the kitchen island. It had become their favorite spot for family discussions, less formal than the dining room, but more intimate than the living room. Jake and Josh exchanged glances. "Actually," Jake began, "we've been researching programs in social work and technology. We want to combine both," Josh explained, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "Use our tech skills to create systems that help kids in situations like ours." Victoria, who was preparing her famous homemade pasta sauce, turned from the stove. "That's wonderful. But why haven't you mentioned this before?" The twins shared another look, before Jake answered carefully. "We weren't sure if college was part of the plan. You've already done so much for us." "Stop right there," Victoria interrupted, wielding her wooden spoon like a conductor's baton. "Education is non-negotiable in this family. Have you forgotten who you're talking to? I have contacts at every major university in the country." Michael smiled at his wife's enthusiasm. The woman who had once worried about taking in street children was now planning their college careers with the same determination she brought to her charity galas. "Actually," he added, "I've been thinking about expanding the company's scholarship program. You two could be the perfect pilot candidates." The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Carter, their butler, appeared moments later. "Miss Maria is here," he announced formally, though his eyes twinkled. The diner owner had become a regular visitor since the summer party. Maria entered the kitchen carrying one of her famous pies. Since the party, she had become something of a bridge between the twins' past and present. Victoria had initially been uncertain about maintaining this connection to their former life, but she had come to appreciate Maria's grounding influence on the boys. "I brought apple pie," Maria announced, setting the pie on the counter. "And some news." She paused dramatically. "Remember that health inspector who always gave me trouble? Well, he came by today, and guess who helped me pass with flying colors? Your magnificent educational app." The twins sat up straighter. They had installed a beta version of their app at Maria's diner, using it to help her digitize her health and safety protocols. It was their first real-world test case. "The inspector was impressed by how organized everything was," Maria continued proudly. "He even asked about the system. I told him all about my boys who created it." Victoria watched as Jake and Josh beamed with pride. These moments of validation, of seeing their work make a real difference, were precious to her. She had learned to appreciate success not just in terms of social status or financial gain, but in the tangible impact it had on people's lives. "We should celebrate," Michael declared. "Maria, you'll join us for dinner?" As they gathered around the kitchen table, no formal dining room tonight, Victoria looked at the faces of her expanded family. Maria, sharing stories about the diner's regular customers who still asked about the twins. Michael, discussing potential business applications for the boys' app. Jake and Josh, their eyes shining with the light of possibility and belonging. "I've been thinking," she said during a lull in the conversation. "The Foundation's annual gala is coming up. Instead of the usual silent auction, what if we did something different this year?" All eyes turned to her curiously. "What if we focused on technology initiatives for underprivileged youth? We could showcase your app, set up a proper funding structure for similar projects, turn it into a real movement." The twins stared at her in amazement. This was Victoria's flagship event, the social highlight of her year. To reshape it around their work was an extraordinary gesture. "Are you sure?" Jake asked. "What about tradition?" "Won't people expect—" "People can expect whatever they want," Victoria said firmly. "It's time for some changes in how we approach charitable giving. Real change comes from empowerment, not just handouts." Michael reached over to squeeze his wife's hand, proud of how far she had come. The woman who had once worried about society's judgment was now prepared to challenge its very foundations. Besides, Victoria added with a smile, who better to speak about the transformative power of opportunity than you two? You're living proof that with the right support and resources, extraordinary things are possible. Maria dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Look at you now, she said softly to the twins. From washing windows to changing lives. Your mama would be so proud. At the mention of their mother, Jake and Josh grew quiet. Victoria, sensing the moment, reached for their hands across the table. She is proud, she said firmly. And so are we. So very proud. The kitchen filled with the warm aroma of Victoria's sauce and Maria's pie. But it was the feeling of belonging, of family chosen and forged through love and understanding, that made the evening perfect. They were building bridges, between past and present, between different worlds, between what was and what could be. As they shared the pie later, plans for the gala taking shape between bites of flaky crust and sweet filling, Victoria realized that her own transformation was perhaps the most profound of all. She had learned that family wasn't about maintaining appearances or meeting social expectations. It was about love, growth, and the courage to see beyond surface differences to the heart of what truly matters. The grand ballroom of the Phoenix Convention Center had been transformed for the Richardson Foundation's annual gala. Instead of the usual crystal and flower centerpieces, each table featured interactive digital displays showcasing various youth empowerment initiatives. The crown jewel was the presentation stage where Jake and Josh's educational app would be unveiled to Phoenix's elite. Victoria stood in the preparation room, making final adjustments to her evening gown. The pearl necklace, now a symbol of trust and growth, gleamed at her throat. The sound of laughter drew her attention to where the twins were helping each other with their bow ties. Here, let me, she said, moving to assist them. As she straightened Josh's tie, she caught a glimpse of their reflection in the mirror. Her boys, so grown up in their tuxedos, looking every bit like they belonged in this world while still maintaining the genuine hearts that had first touched hers. Nervous? She asked, noting their slightly tense expressions. A little, Jake admitted. It's a big night. You've earned this, Victoria assured them. Every single person in that ballroom needs to hear your story and understand what you've accomplished. Michael appeared in the doorway, looking distinguished in his tuxedo. The Prescotts just arrived, he announced. And you won't believe who William brought with him, the Dean of Computer Science from Stanford. The twins' eyes widened. They had recently submitted their college applications, with Stanford being their shared dream school. Victoria had insisted on them applying to all the top programs, but Stanford's combination of technology and social impact initiatives made it their first choice. Remember, Michael said, placing a hand on each boy's shoulder, you've already succeeded. Everything else is just details. The ballroom was filling with Phoenix's most influential families, but there were new faces too. Maria had arrived early, looking elegant in a dress Victoria had helped her choose. She sat at a prime table near the stage, alongside several tech industry leaders and education advocates. As Victoria took the podium to open the evening, she looked out at the familiar faces of her social circle. How different this felt from a year ago, when her biggest concern had been maintaining her position in society. Good evening, she began, her voice clear and confident. For years, the Richardson Foundation has focused on traditional charitable giving. Tonight, we're doing something different. We're not just giving help, we're investing in change. She went on to introduce the new initiative, a technology-driven approach to youth empowerment that would provide not just resources, but opportunities for growth and development. When she called Jake and Josh to the stage, her voice carried unmistakable pride. The twins approached the podium with the poise they had developed over months of preparation. They shared their story, not just of surviving on the streets, but of the transformation that becomes possible when someone believes in your potential. Every kid deserves a chance, Josh said, his voice strong and clear. Not just a handout, but a real opportunity to build their future. Jake continued, demonstrating their app's features. This platform doesn't just provide educational resources. It creates a support network, connecting users with mentors, educational opportunities, and essential services. As they presented, Victoria watched the audience's reactions. She saw Catherine Prescott dabbing at her eyes, William nodding approvingly, and the Stanford dean taking detailed notes. But most importantly, she saw understanding dawning on faces that had once viewed charity as simply writing checks at elegant parties. The presentation concluded with announcement of the first pilot program, a partnership between Richardson Enterprises, local schools, and several tech companies to implement the platform across Phoenix. "This is just the beginning," Jake concluded. "Together we can build bridges between potential and opportunity." The applause was thunderous. As people rose to their feet, Victoria felt tears threatening. She had organized countless galas, but never had she felt such genuine purpose, such real possibility for change. Maria made her way to the stage, enveloping both boys in a fierce hug. "Your mama would be so proud," she whispered, her own eyes glistening. "So very proud." William Prescott approached with the Stanford dean, both men clearly impressed. "We should discuss expanding this program," William said. "The potential applications are extraordinary." As the evening proceeded, Victoria found herself repeatedly explaining to her social circle how her perspective had changed over the past year. "Sometimes," she told them, "the greatest gift we can give is simply believing in someone's potential." Later, during a quiet moment, she found the twins standing on the ballroom's terrace, taking a break from the constant congratulations and networking. "Everything okay?" she asked, joining them in the cool evening air. "Just thinking," Josh replied. "A year ago we were washing windows at that intersection. Now you're changing lives," Victoria completed. "Including mine." Jake turned to her, his expression serious. "We never thought we'd have this again," he said quietly. "A family." Victoria pulled them both into an embrace, not caring about wrinkled tuxedos or social propriety. "Family isn't about where you come from," she said softly. "It's about who you choose to become, together." Inside the ballroom, Michael watched through the glass doors as his wife held their sons. The transformation he had witnessed over the past year went far beyond social status or charitable giving. It was about hearts opening, prejudices falling away, and the remarkable power of love to bridge any divide. The night air carried the sounds of the gala, music, laughter, the buzz of excitement about new possibilities. But out on that terrace, 3 people held on to something more precious than any social success: the unshakable bond of family, forged through challenge and change, stronger for the journey that had brought them together. 5 years had passed since that transformative gala night. The Richardson guest house stood empty now, preserved as a reminder of beginnings, while Jake and Josh had their own apartments near the Stanford campus. But they still came home regularly to the main house, where their rooms remained exactly as they'd left them, a testament to permanence, to belonging. On this particular summer evening, the family had gathered to celebrate a special occasion. The twins' educational platform, now called Bridge Builder, had just reached its millionth user. What had started as a simple app had grown into a nationwide network, connecting underprivileged youth with opportunities, resources, and mentors. Victoria moved through the kitchen, preparing her signature pasta sauce, no longer relying on Carter for family dinners. The sound of laughter drifted in from the backyard, where Michael was grilling while the twins set up for dinner under the stars. "Need any help, Mom?" Jake asked, coming in for plates. The word Mom had emerged naturally over the years, first from Josh during their college graduation, then from Jake shortly after. Each time, it filled Victoria's heart with quiet joy. "Just grab the garlic bread from the oven," she replied, smiling as she watched him move confidently through what was still very much his kitchen, despite the Stanford degree and successful career. Outside, Josh was deep in conversation with Michael about Bridge Builder's latest initiative, a partnership with major tech companies to provide apprenticeships similar to the one that had changed their own lives. "The Richardson Foundation is prepared to match any corporate contributions," Michael was saying. "We've already had interest from 12 Fortune 500 companies." The sound of a car in the driveway announced Maria's arrival. She visited less frequently now that she had franchised her diner into a successful chain with help from the Richardsons, but she remained an essential part of their extended family. "Something smells wonderful," she called out, carrying one of her famous pies. The years had added silver to her hair, but hadn't dimmed her warm smile. As they settled around the outdoor dining table, Victoria looked at the faces illuminated by the setting sun and hanging lights. Jake and Josh, now 24, had grown into remarkable young men. Their success hadn't changed their fundamental nature. They remained compassionate, hard-working, and deeply committed to helping others. "Remember our first family dinner?" Josh asked, passing the salad. "We were so worried about using the wrong fork." Victoria laughed. "And now look at you, working with the biggest tech companies in the world, changing lives across the country." "Speaking of changing lives," Michael interjected, "how many applications did we receive for this year's Richardson Scholars Program?" "Over 3,000, Jake reported. The scholarship program, designed specifically for homeless and at-risk youth, had become one of their most successful initiatives. "We're expanding to 15 cities next year." "And the support network?" Maria asked, having become an active mentor in the program herself. "Growing stronger every day," Josh replied. "We've got former scholarship recipients coming back as mentors now. The circle keeps widening." Victoria felt tears threatening as she listened to them discuss their work. The boys who had once survived by washing windshields were now leading a movement, transforming the landscape of opportunity for thousands of young people. "I have something for you both," she said suddenly, reaching for her bag. She pulled out a small velvet box that everyone recognized, the one that had once held her grandmother's pearl necklace. Opening it, she revealed 2 tie pins, each set with a single pearl. "I had them made from 2 pearls from the necklace," she explained. "Because that necklace, that moment, it taught us all something about trust and family, about how the most precious things can sometimes be hidden until we're ready to see them." The twins accepted the pins with glistening eyes, understanding the deep significance of the gesture. The necklace that had once represented a moment of doubt had been transformed into a symbol of unshakable trust and love. "You know," Michael said thoughtfully, "when I first saw you boys at that intersection, I thought I was the one offering help. I had no idea how much you would give us in return." "You gave us a chance," Jake replied softly. "We gave you our hearts. Seems like a fair trade." Victoria reached for their hands across the table, pearls gleaming at their throats. "No," she corrected gently. "We built something new together. Something stronger than any of us could have created alone." As the sun set over Phoenix, casting threads of gold across the sky, the family continued their celebration. Their conversation drifted between memories and future plans, between laughter and deep discussion of their ongoing work. They talked about the upcoming expansion of Bridge Builder, about the new youth center being built downtown, about the lives being transformed through their programs. But mostly they talked about the simple joy of being together, of having found each other against all odds. The evening wrapped them in its gentle warmth, a reminder that the greatest transformations often begin with the smallest acts of kindness. A businessman stopping at an intersection, a society woman opening her heart, 2 boys brave enough to trust again. In the end, their story wasn't just about second chances or overcoming prejudice. It was about the extraordinary power of love to bridge any divide, heal any wound, and create something beautiful from the broken pieces of the past. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, their light reflected in the swimming pool and caught the gleam of pearls at throats and lapels. Each tiny point of light seemed to echo the truth they had discovered together. That family isn't defined by blood or background, but by the courage to see beyond surfaces to the heart of what truly matters. In that backyard, under the Phoenix stars, they were simply and completely what they had become, a family bound not by convention or circumstance, but by choice, by love, and by the shared understanding that sometimes the most precious things in life are the ones we never knew we were looking for, until they found us.